my personal favourite book in the series. It's a surprising and handy twist that Jamie Lannister is given his own point of view, where we hear his thoughts and get a whole new perspective on him as a character. Personally, I didn't see him as a point of view character coming, and I was very surprised and actually pretty happy to see that he's now someone that we're following. At this point, Jamie is already a shell of his former self. Stripped of his power, physically atrophied, and to add insult to injury, it's none other than Brienne, the 6-foot-tall warrior woman guarding Jamie. Now, I don't need to remind you that George R.R. Martin's world makes our world look, completely non-misogynistic. Women are not treated as equal, and the idea of a woman holding a sword is actually a little bit absurd and laughable. Adding insult to injury here as well is that at every turn, Brienne reminds Jamie that he lacks honour and is no true knight, while keeping her own vow somewhat like the Terminator to protect him despite despising him. Now, at this stage, try, if possible, to put yourself in Jamie's shoes. He was a powerful and wealthy knight and a famed swordsman who was used to having people obey him without question. Now, after being imprisoned and powerless for a year, he is bound and being guarded by a woman in a world that by our standards is totally misogynistic. Even now, though Jamie has still not even started his redemption, he still makes cruel japes at every turn and holds human life in very low regard. He really just still doesn't give a fuck. When Jamie grabbed his dead cousin's sword and attacked Brienne with it, it was perhaps his last and most desperate effort in the series to reclaim his former self. It is at this moment when the troll in George R.R. Martin shines through like a golden lion. After only just being defeated by Brienne, they are held hostage by Vargo Hoat and his brave companions. What happens next is an example of the cruel nature of the series and the final part of Jamie losing everything he formerly identified himself with. Because at this stage he's still a surprisingly good swordsman even while chained up. In an effort to make Roose Bolton and the Lannisters enemies, Hoat, Jamie's captor, cuts off his right arm. All the handy and disarming puns aside, this was an utterly cruel act that leaves Jamie at his lower point, completely self-hating and literally ready to die. It isn't until this point, when everything is taken from Jamie, that his redemption can truly begin. Introspection is forced on Jamie when he begins to question if all he ever was a sword hand, a puppet, and nothing more. He does not identify with, nor is he a person who thinks before he acts, and the loss of his right arm has essentially taken away his last morsel of power. This leaves him with the realization that all along he has been nothing more than a puppet for those around him, including his father, Cersei, Aerys. He recaps quite a lot, but we'll get to that in a minute. The first signs of Jamie changing himself and the beginning of his redemption happens when Brienne calls him a craven for embracing death. This sparks something inside of Jamie, and he then decides to cling to life and regain his strength. The tone of the chapter changes, and we are given hope for the character. Jamie, seeking to regain his strength, is both symbolically and literally him beginning to bring himself back up from nothing. Later on in the bathhouse with Brienne, we finally learn the truth about Jamie Lannister the Kingslayer and what made him the man he is today. We are told through his narration and him talking to Brienne about how, from a young age, he was used as a pawn. By Cersei, he acted for love of her, by Tywin, and by the Mad King. We also learn that during his time with the king, Jamie witnessed some events that were nothing short of traumatic, even for a seasoned knight such as him. The way that Eddard's brother and father were killed just sounded completely horrific, and it is alluded to that this sort of thing was routine while Aerys was king. This left Jamie with the ability to switch off and no longer be fazed by horrible things happening around him, something he later shares with Tommen in A Feast for Crows. When it came time to kill Aerys, Jamie was actually served a huge bowl of shit. It was break his vows by killing a complete monster of a king, or let his father and all of his men die a horrible death. As a result of his choice, that most of us can probably relate to, Jamie has walked around his entire life with the horrible curse of being known as the Kingslayer for what he feels is his greatest act. This has left him bitter and has left him acting out against everyone. This has made him completely bitter and is why he acts out towards everyone in the series and why he seems like he just doesn't give a fuck. The bathhouse chapter gives the readers information they didn't have while reading the first two books. George R.R. Martin kept us in the dark and allowed us to judge this character until this point. This is also why A Song of Ice and Fire as a series is very rereadable. Knowing why Jamie is the way he is while rereading the earlier books offers a completely different perspective on the character and on the entire situation. It also adds a shade of grey where formerly there was only black and white. Characters such as Eddard, who judge Jamie as a Kingslayer or an Oathbreaker, even though he saved their life, are now arguably more naive for thinking in such simple terms. An interesting beat in the story occurs during a conversation between Jamie and his captor, Roose Bolton. While Jamie is at Roose Bolton's mercy, he wonders to himself, what would Tyrion do? In the same way that Tyrion's narrations often state, what would Jamie do in this situation? It is indeed an interesting parallel between the two Lannister brothers, as Jamie, sadly, was one of Tyrion's few sources of affection growing up. This is all very ironic, because now that he is crippled, atrophied, and has lost his good looks, Jamie is closer to Tyrion, Brienne, Jon Snow, or any of the series' various misfits than he is to his former self. Once Jamie sees the world from the perspective of one of the world's misfits, it's as though his and our blinders have been lifted, and he sees things for what they are. It also forces him to, like Tyrion, work within his new means more. He can no longer hack and slash his way out of problems or threaten people with his political power. George R.R. Martin's Westeros is a place with very rigid values. Women are aligned to their roles, as are men. Knights have shit for honor, and thus it's very easy for people who don't fit into the world's idea of what's right and normal to have a hard time living within this world. At this point, Jamie is well underway to his redemption. The dream sequence he has later on shows us that Jamie, at his very core, is now a changed man from how he was before. He dreams of Brienne fighting and protecting him against the likes of Eddard and others who called him Kingslayer, while at the same time, in his dream, his father and sister had left him to his fate. He is finally realizing that all along he has been nothing but a pawn for his family. On waking, Jamie then pulls a complete Tyrion and in a very morally grey manner uses dirty tactics and the threat of lies to ride back to Harrenhal and save Brienne. At the start of the series, Jamie no doubt would have left Brienne to her fate. When Jamie selflessly and very recklessly rescues Brienne from a bear, he utters probably my personal favourite line in the series, "I only rescue maidens," after asking Brienne if she was still a virgin. This is George R.R. Martin taking the piss out of the traditional and unrealistic notion of honour and knighthood. With this line, Jamie is parodying his fictional step-cousin Prince Charming, reminding us that there is still no such thing as true honour. On his return to King's Landing, Jamie is a completely changed man. Evidence of this is how he reacts to his sister. He has sex with her for one last time very close to Joffrey's corpse. At this point, and continuing on to A Feast for Crows, Jamie has realised that Cersei has used him his entire life. During A Feast for Crows, after rescuing Tyrion, Jamie repeats to himself, "She's been fucking Lancel and Sir Osmond for all I know." Jamie doesn't even feel like any of his 3 children belong to him. Cersei used him for his seed too. It's a heartbreaking but necessary realisation for Jamie that his sister never loved him in the same way that he loved her. Before the end of A Dance with Dragons, we are given a hint that Jamie has begun lusting after other women, yet another sign of his reform. The last, or perhaps most recent, sign of Jamie giving up on his love for his sister occurs when he ignores her letter pleading him for help. It's a ridiculous notion that the now crippled Jamie Lannister would be a suitable champion for trial by combat anyway, although that reflects more on Cersei than him, so I shall continue on. In a fantastic moment, Jamie also affronts his father, the ever-powerful Tywin Lannister, by refusing to marry at his behest and opting instead to take up his position as head of the Kingsguard. What's fantastic about this point is in the books, Jamie does not overtly think to himself, "I am tired of being used like this by my father." Instead, the whole situation just suddenly makes him sick to his stomach. He is so completely over the idea of being used that his whole being rebels against it. Jamie is no longer a puppet for other people, he now does things for himself, and dons the white robe, this time in earnest. From this point onwards, instead of being destructive to those around him, he seeks to better the world he lives in. He is now a true knight of the Kingsguard, and a worthy successor to the great Sir Barristan. In Jamie's last chapter in Storm of Swords, his redemption comes to a close. For starters, he gives Brienne the appropriately named sword Oathkeeper and instructs her to save Sansa Stark, the last surviving member of the family. The symbolism here is almost too obvious. Jamie is acting in a selfless manner and is keeping his oath to Catelyn by attempting to save Sansa. His respect and acceptance for Brienne is complete, and he sets her out on her quest that would be prevalent in A Feast for Crows. In the same chapter, a final moment of introspection occurs for Jamie when he reads over Sir Barristan's impressive section as head of the Kingsguard. When Jamie compares himself unfavourably to Barristan, he feels humbled, which is not something he felt often at the start of the series. The chapter ending with the line, "But the rest Jamie Lannister would need to write for himself. He could write whatever he chose henceforth. Whatever he chose," is the final sign that Jamie is now on a different path and he now feels he has autonomy over his own life. So the end of A Storm of Swords is the end of Jamie Lannister's redemption. He then goes on to rescue his brother, end his long-term affair with his sister, and unite the various factions of Westeros. Even from the start of the third book to the start of A Feast for Crows, Jamie's narration has changed substantially. He also furthers his rehabilitation by learning to become a competent, although not amazing swordsman with his left hand, continuously dueling with the dumb Ilan Payne, so that word of his poor swordsmanship won't get out. He even shows hints of becoming a father figure towards Tommen. In the eyes of the readers, and after being dragged through his own personal hell by perhaps one of the most cruel authors I have ever had the pleasure of reading, Jamie Lannister is now redeemed. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If I missed anything, or if you feel that I've gotten any of the details wrong, then please, by all means, leave a comment and let me know. I'd be happy to start a discussion with any of you, any fellow fans of the book series. Also, I'd like to thank the nice people at DeviantArt that let me use their photos or pictures to make this video a bit more visually stimulating than it otherwise would have been. Not using any footage from the show might have been a bit of a crutch, but my point stands, this was about the books and not the TV series. So, thanks for watching. See you later.